Getting into God Bomb, this basically brings the end of Gorr the God Butcher. This is kind of like the self-contained story. And that was a cool thing. I mean, I imagine that, with Jason Aaron, when he was writing the story, it was all designed to be one great big cohesive thing. I mean, once the time comes when Jason Aaron, when Marvel announces that Jason Aaron is now leaving Thor, you'll literally be able to pick up with God Butcher and just read all the way up to wherever he stopped, and it'll just be one cohesive story. And I have, and I will continue to say that this is the greatest run of Thor that there's ever been. Like, I've read so many runs of Thor. I've read Matt Fraction, I've read Straczynski, I've read Walt Simonson, and to me, I sit down and I say, this is the best run there's ever been. I mean, all the other ones are great, they're fun, they're interesting, I like them, but in terms of development, in terms of storytelling, in terms of expansion, in terms of the art and how gorgeous it is, this is the greatest run of Thor that I think there has ever been. And so, picking up from the last video, when we had basically talked about the idea that Gorr the God Butcher had essentially jumped to the future after grabbing the heart of the first Elder God, this essentially fueled his power. Now keep in mind, as Gorr kills gods and takes their blood or whatever the case may be, he expands his own powers. And so in the future, he's become really the most powerful being in existence among the traditional pantheon of gods. I mean, keep in mind, if like the living tribunal showed up and was like, okay, you basically disrupted the balance of all things, the living tribunal would just phase him out of existence. Eternity could destroy, Gorr the God Butcher. I mean, there's a litany of ways that like Jason Aaron could end this. They wouldn't be fun, but he could end them in a whole litany of ways. But the idea here is that we initially pick up with with modern day Thor and King Thor. Now, this is where things are going to get a lot more streamlined than they were, because in God Butcher, we were following 3 eras of Thor. In this story, we are, but they're all in the same place. So it's not like we're jumping through the past, present, and the future and trying to confine it into a story and make it make sense. Instead, we are basically just kind of covering all different versions of these Thor in the same point in time. So we'll still call them like young Thor, I guess, past Thor and modern Thor and King Thor. But the fact remains here that with modern Thor and King Thor meeting together, some of the questions that we have are answered to a degree. One of the things that he basically states is that in this era, that about 900 years before this current moment, Gorr had just shown up on Asgard and invaded Asgard proper. And in doing so, he had essentially taken all the Asgardians prisoner with the exception of Thor himself. Thor was forced to basically stay on Asgard and just fend off against wave after wave after wave of the Black Berserkers of Gorr. Now, this begs the question, what happened to Odin? Now, when it comes to the character of Odin, we have what's called Ragnarok. Ragnarok, and we'll talk more about this once we actually get to like the Ragnarok story. Ragnarok is basically the end times of Asgard. It is the apocalypse of Asgard. But what Thor had learned and what we as the reader had learned was that Ragnarok was a constantly repeating cycle. That to the Asgardians, to their mind, you would eventually have Surtur, who would kill Odin. Loki would launch a war against Asgard. He would invade. He would conquer Asgard. Thor would be killed. And then eventually the Asgardians would be killed. And that would be it. Everybody in Asgard would effectively just die. Like that would be, they'd die in some grandiose battle, but they would all end up dying. What we learned was that there was this group called the Ones Who Sit Above in Shadow, who have been feeding on this cycle. And so where Thor looks at the modern day and says, this is the only life that I have, in reality, he's been repeating his life over and over and over again. He just didn't know it. And the Ones Who Sit Above in Shadow were feeding on this perpetual cycle of Ragnarok. Now, eventually Odin figured out what was going on. And instead of Thor just staying in Asgard, Odin basically cast Thor out. It's one of the reasons why he banished him and then confined him to Earth so that he would be raised on Earth and would eventually, come across this path that would lead to the death of Odin. And Thor would have the reason to ask what's going on here, because by his own involvement with Captain America and Iron Man and different things like that, he would see the world through the perspective of a human, which in turn would create curiosity. And in his curiosity, he would want to know what's going on with Ragnarok, how does it work, and how do I stop it from happening? And so again, it's really kind of a cool scenario in terms of how that unfolds. We'll get into a far more in-depth explanation of Ragnarok once we get around to that story with the release of Thor 3. But the fact remains here that because of the fact that Thor knows what Ragnarok is, because he's aware of Ragnarok, so does King Thor, since he's basically Thor in the future. And so the idea here is that in his mind, Odin has effectively just died somewhere along the line. That's really what it is. I mean, Odin has basically just kind of moved on, and Thor has what's called the Thor Force. Now, the Thor Force and the Odin Force, those are just names given to whoever it is that's wielding that particular power. The Odin Force is just an insane amount of energy that Odin has, and it allows him to do whatever it is that he wants to do at any particular point in time. It's a plot device. When Odin dies, that power passes to Thor, and it becomes the Thor Force. Likewise, it could be that both Odin and Thor die, and the power would pass to Loki, and it would become the Loki Force. It's just whoever it is that's wielding that power at any particular point in time. But the fact remains that King Thor has the Thor force. The difference is that, remember, the Thor force is like a battery. So anybody who wields it long enough, if they do not go into the Odin sleep or the Thor sleep, in this case, they would just basically run out of power. And that's really what it is. He's been fighting for so long and he's exhausted so much energy, he can't go into the Thor sleep. He can't rest. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anybody to defend Asgard. And so the result is that his power is effectively almost completely defeated. Now, with the arrival of modern Thor, what this does is it rekindles hope. It rekindles the possibility that he may yet live. It rekindles the possibility that Asgard could very well be saved. At the same time, modern Thor and future Thor are joined by past Thor. And the reason why is because of the fact that past Thor basically has this dream where he realizes that Gorr the God Butcher isn't dead, where he previously believed he had killed him. One of Gorr's Black Berserkers kind of throws like this Cronus charge at him or something like that. Anyway, just time displaces him and it teleports him to the future. That's really all it is. Of course, he rises up through the pond. The difference here is that he does not immediately join modern and future Thor. Instead, he's actually forced into being a subject. He's forced into being a slave. Now, the reason for this is twofold. The first half is that in the mind of Gorr, he's captured so many gods already and his power is so extreme, he's not worried about modern or future Thor. Now, that will be really the source of his undoing, and that's his hubris. The other half of this is that because Thor is so strong and because Thor is so capable and because he is the one that almost killed Gorr, capturing Thor is really more of like a trophy than anything else. I finally captured the guy who almost killed me. It's basically Gorr kind of solidifying in his own mind that he is indeed the god of gods, so to speak, that he's the one person that's going to bring everything crashing down. And so with this in mind, what King Thor tells modern Thor is that, again, where Gorr had basically showed up on Asgard, he had captured all the Asgardians. Those who fought against Gorr had basically been killed, and those who had been captured had been whisked off to a planet on the far side of the universe where Gorr is building a god bomb, a bomb that's designed to eliminate all gods. We follow King Thor and modern Thor over to the location of where Gorr is hanging out at. Now, getting a little bit more into this whole idea of a god bomb, what we end up finding out is that Gorr is not entirely wrong. Now, for those of you guys who are reading Unworthy Thor, this is why Jason Aaron's run is so important. This is why Jason Aaron's run is so significant. There's a conversation that happens between Gorr and his son. We don't really know where his son came from. We don't know why he's there, but there's a conversation that happens between the two of them. And what Gorr says is that in his mind, gods are inherently evil. Gods are inherently bad. Gods, answer the prayers of their followers based on a whim. They may choose not to answer. They may choose to answer. It's just kind of doing whatever they want to do when they do it and how they do it and so on and so forth. And so because of that, Gorr wants to eliminate them all. The purpose of the god bomb is to essentially detonate the bomb so that when it goes off, it will kill all gods throughout the time stream. Gods from the present, gods from the past, gods from the future, those who may have been hidden away from Gorr that he just didn't know about and never caught and killed, those who were never caught and captured, whatever the case may be, they will die all throughout the time stream. Now, notice the motivation of Gorr with this mindset. Gorr has basically been passing this information onto his son. And so when Gorr's son speaks directly with Thor, who's basically working as a prisoner, Gorr's son basically says, look, what this is going to do is it's going to usher in a great era. It's going to usher in an era where people don't fight over which god's real and which god's false. People won't fight over which god's right and which god is wrong. People will not live their lives waiting for an eternity of splendor or fearing an eternity of hell. People will live in the moment. They will value what they have. They will recognize this life is the only life they have, and they will treat it that way. They will take the most advantage out of it. That's not wrong. And that's the coolest thing about that, is because that's what Nick Fury was saying when he whispered to Odinson and he said Gorr was right and it made him unworthy. It was the Hammer realizing that's true. Like, it's true. Like, people like Thor, they represent the ideology that people don't value the life they have. They value the life they hope they have. And so again, it's basically, never really living in the moment. That's why Jane Foster was chosen, because she's literally a person dying of cancer. Every moment could be her last. And so she values what she has left of her life, because for her, she doesn't view the possibility of an afterlife. She doesn't view the possibility of going to heaven. She views the life that she has as being the only one she has, and she looks to make the most of it. She's living in the present, not living in the future. That's why the Hammer chose her. And that's why it's so cool. That's why all this wraps around and creates one great big cohesive story, because you get a little piece here and you get a little piece there, and then you get a little piece over there somewhere, and then it all comes together to create this amazing cohesive story where everything is important. And that's why I love it so much. That's why it's such a cool thing. Now from here, we are introduced to the granddaughters of King Thor. And this is really kind of cool because these chicks, they do not play. Like, they are they are hardcore. But the funny thing about this is that while they are being forced to work in subservience, which is to say to basically help build this god bomb, at the end of the day, they're also planning a way to get out. And the funny thing is that with past Thor being so young, being so brash, being so reckless, showing up here, having been captured and saying, well, we have to fight and we have to win and we have to get our freedom. He's not thinking rationally. He's not thinking according to a plan. And that's really what Jason Aaron is hitting on when it comes to these different iterations of Thor. And that's something that I hope you notice. Past Thor is young. I mean, he's young, he's brash. Let's just battle. You know, when it comes to modern day Thor is a little more reasonable. He's a little more thinking. He's still quick to fight. He's still quick to battle. But King Thor is old. He's wise. It is basically the steps of Thor as he becomes essentially Odin, as he eventually gets to the point where he realizes that sometimes you can't just fight directly. Sometimes you need a plan. Sometimes you have to function accordingly. Sometimes you just have to be intelligent about what you do. And so it's really kind of cool to see these different iterations coming together. But of course, with young Thor, he's basically told, look, you know, get back to work, keep your mouth shut, do not draw attention to us. And the reason why is because picking up later that night with the granddaughters of King Thor, we ultimately find that what they've done is they basically constructed a bomb of their own. And the reason why is because of the fact that in 3 days, the god bomb will be finished and every god everywhere in existence will be destroyed. And when that happens, all things will essentially come crashing down, including all of them there. And so the goal is to basically destroy this god bomb before it can go off. Now, of course, the funny thing about this, and this is really when like the brash nature of young Thor comes into the equation, when he simply just grabs the bomb and races off. Races off with the god bomb with the intention of destroying it. Now, things get a little bit murky at this point, and I would imagine Jason Aaron kind of fast-tracked things a bit. And the reason why is because of the fact that where the bomb is detonated, we immediately transition over to King Thor and modern Thor, where they're facing off against some of these gods that are basically being used, like these shark gods that are being used as kind of like guards of the planet of Gorr. And then they're suddenly met with the arrival of young Thor. We don't know how he got there. We don't know, you know, if he was just teleported, if the god bomb went off, and he was just suddenly moved away. We're not really sure exactly why it is that he's here. We just know that he is. But alongside modern Thor and alongside King Thor, what they basically say is we have to destroy Gorr. We have to kill him so that we can make sure that all gods everywhere survive. So we effectively have 3 different Thors fighting in the same battle, and it is a sight to behold. Now, from here, we get into the downfall of Gorr. And this is one of the greatest things about this. With Jason Aaron's storytelling, he does not take a conventional approach with ending stories, which is to say, hey guys, here's a really cool event and it's done. It doesn't go that way with Jason Aaron. Jason Aaron really kind of builds up, he builds characters up, and then he gives them a gradual downfall. And it's usually an ironic downfall. Against the force of 3 Thors, Gorr cannot pull it off. And what Jason Aaron is basically saying here is that Thor is unique among all the gods that are in existence because of his desire for battle, because of his desire for conflict, because he's so capable at what he does. He cannot simply just be defeated like any sort of god. When you have 3 of them, they are nigh unstoppable. And so Gorr literally throws every single thing he has at them. He kills other gods that are currently his slaves to absorb their power and increase his own, and he still can't pull it off initially. And so what we end up having is all 3 of these gods racing into Gorr, engaging in this massive battle, which leads into them basically kind of being, I guess, catapulted into the sun. Now, this is kind of cool. Actually, this is pretty damn amazing, to be honest with you guys. And the reason why is because of the fact that with 3 Thors facing off against Gorr, we would expect them to win, right? Like we would expect them to take the day, only for Gorr to, you know, for the battle to end, for all 3 Thors to come crashing back to Earth, and for Gorr to have been the one that came out triumphant. And so what Jason Aaron does is he gives us this amazing crescendo. It's almost like this feeling that all hope is lost, that Gorr has managed to defeat 3 Thors, and they all have an incredible endurance, fighting prowess, the whole 9 yards, and Gorr still wins. And so again, it's a very terrifying situation. But what we end up doing is we pick up with the wife of Gorr when she basically begins, you know, kind of talking to her husband. Now, this is where the downfall comes into play. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that she says, look, you know, I look forward to an era when the god bomb is detonated. I look forward to an era when there are no more gods out there, when there are no more people to worship, you know, and she expresses her affection by basically referring to him and saying, you are my god. In return, Gorr kills her, and that's where the downfall comes into play. And the reason why is because of the fact that the entire scenario is observed by the son of Gorr. Now, where the son plays along and says, look, you know, yes, I can't wait for this bomb to go off, yada, 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 you know, we'll get everything set up and going. At the end of the day, he intends to kill his father because his father killed his mother. And so again, it's so cool because usually whenever it comes to like dystopian rulers or like totalitarians or something like that, the one thing they fear is someone rising up and either becoming a martyr or mustering all the forces together and just outright bringing them down. It's the one thing that Gorr fears above all others. He fears someone rising up with enough power to bring him crashing down. And it's that way with every single narrative when there's someone with absolute power. Now, it doesn't mean that they are successfully defeated, but it does mean that it is one thing that they fear. And so by going through and basically charging up this god bomb with one of the Thors who's remained captured by Gorr, as well as the other two Thors, trying to climb back into battle, climbing up mountainsides from wherever it was that they landed, the modern Thor is basically rescued by the son of Gorr. And the son of Gorr says, look, my father killed my mother. I will help you defeat my father. Now, the reason why this is so cool is because the son of Gorr represents what Gorr used to be. In the origin story of Gorr, Gorr used to be a guy where he was basically just trying to live a reasonable life. I mean, he had a wife, he had children of his own. He was very mortal. He was very emotional, dare I say, very human in terms of how he existed. It was only after he lost everything that he became so dark and he became so bleak. But his son is still who Gorr used to be. His son still cares about others. His son still feels love, still feels emotion, still feels affection. And so because of that, in his anger, in his wrath, and in his desire for revenge, he takes a side against his father. In doing this, it grants a reprieve for all three Thors to reband back together again and begin the process of waging a war against Gorr, trying to bring him down. Now, this is where things get incredibly cool, because as each one begins to take on Gorr, each one of them begins to meet their defeat. And ultimately, it comes down to the modern day version of Thor, who picks up both his hammer and the hammer of King Thor. Now, this is something that we've almost never seen before. I don't think I've ever seen an instance when we've had a Thor wield two hammers at the same time. Now, this is crazy because the power of the hammers has always been something that's a little bit ambiguous. And even then, when this story was written, the power behind the hammers had not been explained by Jason Aaron. Now, we know now that it's just like this sentient cosmic storm. It's basically cosmic energy inside this hammer that's been harnessed by Odin so that Thor can use it. Having two hammers composed of cosmic energy creates a level of power hitherto unrivaled. And so what this does with Thor essentially smashing them together, it allows him to both destroy the god bomb before it kills any of the other gods across all time and space, as well as absorb the necro sword. Now, what this does is it basically transforms Thor into the god of gods, because we now have Thor wielding the all black necro sword, a weapon designed to do nothing more than kill gods and destroy worlds, as well as wielding two hammers. This is probably the single greatest picture that I've ever seen in my life when it comes to Thor. He looks so badass with his whole getup. He's just like cloud and black with two hammers. I mean, it's one of the coolest things that I've ever seen. But Gorr has essentially lost the source of his power. That's really what it is. He has no power left. There's nothing left coming to him. He is effectively as mortal as he was in his origin story. And so because of this, because of the fact that Gorr has been defeated, his son appears to him and says, look, I am the source of your defeat. But what we also end up learning is that his son is not actually his son. Instead, his son was a construct created by the necro sword. So again, this is really kind of an interesting scenario, because what it does is it shows us that deep in his core, once you get past his whole desire to kill gods, Gorr was still very much, human, so to speak, in the sense that he wanted offspring, he wanted a life. But it also shows us that he was not just inherently evil. He may have lost his way, he may have fallen down the wrong path, but at the end of the day, his motivation was to basically create a world or a universe, a reality without gods, because in his mind, the gods were the source of all suffering that existed out there. And so it begs the question, how many civilizations have suffered? How many people have died across the universe because the gods did not answer their call? Again, rolling back into the idea of why the hammer chose Jane Foster to be worthy instead of allowing Odin's son to be worthy. So again, it's a beautiful story that all kind of comes together and, really becomes cohesive. But in these final moments, Gorr's effectively defeated by being decapitated, and that's really about it. I mean, from there, there's really nothing more that goes on with this character. That's pretty much the end of him. And so what this does is it gives us kind of a really cool epilogue, in the sense that we pick up about 3 days later after this battle, in the sense that Asgard has turned into this sort of beacon and home for gods across the cosmos, that all gods from all these different races are all kind of coming back. They're arriving on Asgard. It's going to serve as a major hub. Of course, what's left of the Asgardians still reside there. We don't know explicitly what role that, Asgard will play in the future, at least not yet. But at this moment, we just sort of pick up with the idea that everybody's living out the rest of their lives. That past Thor, that modern Thor are sent back to their own times respectively. King Thor stays in the future. And that's really it. I mean, it's really the idea that they just kind of go back to doing what they were doing before. But what this does is it sets the stage for the arrival of Galactus on Earth. And it actually sets the stage for old King Thor versus Galactus. And the question question of what it is that happened to Earth in this reality. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.